I was thinking, how do I start this class? And I was thinking about chapters, the bridge or the last verse in chapter 1 of Exodus, and the first verse in chapter 2 of Exodus. And the juxtaposition between these verses is unbelievable, in my opinion. So, verse 22 of chapter 1 says that Pharaoh commanded all his people, all of the Egyptians, saying, any male that's born, you should cast into the Nile, and every daughter you let live. So the commentaries say this is referring to the children of Israel. I mean, I even have heard that some say he was even referring to all children, but the simple interpretation is it was referring to the children of the Israelites, of the Jews, that he told all his people that they should all be murderers. Every single one of them should participate, seek out, they should have a neighbor who's a Jew, or go to the Jewish settlements, find Jewish male babies, cast them into the Nile. The very next verse, it says, and a man went from the house of Levi, and he took the daughter of Levi as a wife. And it's just like, you look at these verses here and you say, look at what is going on over here. On the one hand, you see that the Egyptians are going to the lowest depths here, and we'll explain more of the connection in a moment. And yet, and not only that, the children of Israel are at this low point where there's a decree of death on their male children. And at this point, this man is getting married. What a time to get married. He's thinking to get married now. Just when they make this decree, he's getting, that's what it sounds like. I mean, we go right away from this verse that there's a decree that all males should be cast into the Nile, and that's not a pretty death, by the way. That's not, that's a horrible, I mean, if you wrap your head around this society, that Egypt, what Egypt has become, and this is really, I'm already letting in on what I want to talk about, is that you're seeing a development of two peoples, or, you see the step-by-step progression or regression. You're seeing the fall and the elevation of two peoples. You're going to see how certain people rise up from a situation and others are drawn down so low. And what I want to talk about is like, what perspectives, what ways of thinking caused this? Now, you can see this in the verses, the lessons of what brought the nation of Egypt this low to turn into a whole nation of murderers. And for what reason? What did this people do to them? That they've come to such a point of such a level of oppression and kind of genocide, right? Kill all males. And yet, where does this son of Levi find the strength that in this nightmare to get married, to bring in a potential of having children during this very same time? It's kind of like something we talked about last week, that we see that the Jewish people, the children of Israel, they have this strength that within the darkest times, they seem to pull out inner strength to do heroic things when things get really difficult. I mean, this is impossible. This is like, the faith. We know, I assume you probably know the famous Midrash Rashi brings about this story that Amram, which was this man of the house of Levi, he marries his aunt, Yocheved, who was the son of Levi. And it says that Rashi brings, this was the second time they got married. They were married before they got divorced. Why? They got divorced because of the decree. Amram didn't want to bring children into the world if this was the case. And it kind of makes sense. I don't blame him. And can you imagine, out of a union of love and faith in God, people come together and a woman bears a child, knowing that the child is going to be murdered. I mean, it's a very hard time to bear children. In fact, we know there is actually a halacha that in times of famine and starvation, that people should refrain from intercourse in having children during a time of famine. So you might think maybe this is a crisis, maybe it's a time to refrain. Of course, it isn't the same, it's a little bit different. But Miriam, right, the older child, she says, how can you do this? You're worse than Pharaoh. Pharaoh only decreed on the boys. You're decreeing on the boys and the girls. And he listens, and he returns to his wife, and he makes a new, betrothed her once again, etc. But still, if you think about it, what kind of a place is this coming from? And what was Miriam's argument, really? What was her argument? She's saying you're decreeing on everyone. Yeah, but I understand what you're saying, but you're decreeing on the boy. I mean, can't we just wait a little bit? Let's see what happens. Why do we have to? I mean, but basically what Miriam is saying is that it's worth a chance of bringing a child into this world that's going to die a horrible death. If maybe we can have other children that'll live. I mean, that's what she's saying, isn't it? It's a very powerful statement, but it's also what she's arguing is a tremendous amount of self-sacrifice. She's basically saying, do some, cut off. You should be ready to cut off your right hand to save your left hand. In other words, what I'm saying is think about what this means on a human level. To bring a child that's going to be, murdered, that's going to be lost in a horrible way, a small infant. What a kind of terrible pain that could bring to a parent. And she's suggesting that they take the risk because it might be a girl. And we have to keep going. That's what she's saying. And they agree. So one of the things I was thinking of, this is a level of self-sacrifice for the nation. Personally, for the good of Amram and Yocheved, they have a daughter already. Boys, I think Aaron was born already also. They could just say, listen, we fulfilled the mitzvah. We have a boy and a girl. We already have a girl. We should go through this pain. And I think that this is, again, this responsibility to the nation, to the Jewish people. We need to have more children. And for the sake of the nation, we have to you have to be willing to sacrifice and shed tears. It seems, interestingly enough, that this deep dedication that the matriarchs, particularly we see it right in Jacob's wives, their devotion, they worked so hard to try to have children. And they were like, what's the word in English? But they were basically, grabbing at opportunities to have children, and praying and hoping that they have the other child, the other son, so that all the 12 are born, right? So the patriarchs and matriarchs are all about thinking ahead in terms of the future, their future offspring, the future of this nation that was so important to God's plan. And I think that was deeply instilled in them. I'd say this, it was deeply instilled in the women, right? Where here, and the Midrash tells us how the women were devoted to having more children despite everything. And even though their husbands were exhausted, they found ways to try to conceive, and then they would flee into, have children under trees, because it's under apple trees or something. That they would give birth there. I mean, that's really, so I guess what I'm trying to say is that these things are taught. That the women learned from the matriarchs. They had this devotion to this mission of creating the what we now call the Jewish nation, the nation of Israel. And they were totally devoted to this. And even though the men, they kind of got more confused than the women. The women were more devoted and they had more faith than the men. And you could say a little bit because, men, men study Torah, it's more intellectual, and they go to yeshiva, and but that bond, that chain, the links of the changing mother and daughter and granddaughter and so on, that the matriarchs taught the girls, that was not broken. That was not broken. And we see this continuously, the faith that they had faith, also that they were going to be redeemed, that they brought the musical instruments out of Egypt because they knew there was going to be a miracle. And so we see the strength of their education and their upbringing. But there's another point that I wanted to bring out, is the juxtaposition between faith and optimism and paranoia and pessimism. Because where does the hatred of the Egyptians begin, right? Where do we start? So we're starting that the children of Israel are numerous. They're spreading, they're getting large. Okay, I don't think they're more Israelites than Egyptians, though, right? I mean, there's still more Egyptians than there are Israelites. Than there are Hebrews. It's still, but there's a new king now. He forgets all about the good that Joseph did, right? Some say he was the same king, but he made himself like he forgot. Either way, it doesn't really it's not much of a difference in practice of the lesson, because it should have been what Joseph did was in their history and was probably well known. So whether it was the same king or another king, either way, the person ignored Joseph's role in, saving Egypt and making it a world power even more than whatever it was before. So they had no gratitude towards what Joseph did. So that's also the opposite of a Jewish value, because we know later on that the different peoples that did certain favors for the children of Israel as on their way out of Egypt in the desert, forever they have to continue treating them with a little bit of greater favoritism, right? In fact, Egypt itself, it says that they shouldn't, the first few generations are not accepted, but then we do accept Egyptians. You can't completely reject an Egyptian, because at the end of the day, they were your host nation, which is incredible. Despite everything, still they were your host. It's kind of like such a host I don't need. That's my host. That that's what they say, like with friends like these, with hosts like these. This is like it's like a Halloween. It's like a horror movie. You go to someone's house, and then what does he do? He turns you into a slave, and he throws your kids in the toilet. This is not. And then you're going to be thankful. This is crazy, right? But no. Even in such a situation, first of all, there were good years, right? The initial years of Jacob were very, very good. People were treated well. But it just shows you the idea of, again, appreciating the positive, like how far gratitude goes, that even in a situation like that, we're still not blind to the good. Even though so much evil was done, we're still not blind to what good was done. But anyway, I'm getting a little bit far afield here. The point is that what did Pharaoh do here? How did he convince the people to oppress the Jews over here? He said, they're going to grow very numerous, and they're going to rise up together with our enemies, and they will eject us from the land. Some say it means, well, they're going to leave, the simple translation is, they're going to fight us, and they're going to leave the land. They're going to leave the land. So what? I don't know. They're going to leave with a lot of our possessions. They're going to leave. Okay. So, Rashi brings a second idea that they're going to kick us out, and they're going to stay here. We're going to have to leave. In any event, it's paranoid. They're very paranoid. And he convinces them do they have any real basis for this? Is there any proof? Any facts? Any data? I know that's a very modern way of looking at things, of doing a study, but what is this based on? Meaning to say, there is the threat that they're growing in number, but are they hostile? Have they proven to be loyal subjects? Why are you jumping to oppress them because there are many of them? It's out of fear, right? there's a possibility maybe because they're stronger, they can come with us head to head. So let's put them down now. It's a very evil way. It's a very wicked way of looking at other people. You're always looking at them as a potential threat. And how can I keep them if they get a little stronger? And so look what's happening here. When the person has a neighbor who's things are starting to go good for them. They're having children. They're getting a job promotion. All the neighbor sees is bad. He's getting better. Maybe he's going to buy the house next door. Maybe his kind are going to come in here. Maybe this, maybe that. Only looking at the bad. Only looking at the other person as a threat. Instead of being happy that things are going well for them. In other words, looking at it with a wicked eye instead of a good eye. Only jealousy, only feeling threatened by someone else for no reason. What's the basis? Here, there's no basis. It's a sickness. And what's interesting is if you think about it, is their own actions ended up bringing what it is that they were afraid of. Right? They say, oh, they're going to rise up and they're going to leave. That's what they did. Because of you, because you enslaved them, God took them out early and they left and they took all your possessions with them. So in essence, your fear that brought you to do these evil acts ended up bringing about this that you were afraid of in the first place. So I think it's a big lesson of what not to do, what not to follow. And look what this fear turned into, this feeling of hatred that stems from fear, turned into that, as I said, the whole nation became murderers. The first thing they did was they enslaved them. But the first type of enslavement wasn't so bad. Why? Because they gave them productive work. They built storage cities for Pharaoh. Okay, so it was terrible, but they accomplished something great. So there's that comfort that you're doing something. But then the work turned into just sadistic work, just to humiliate. That was the second thing. And so in verse 11 of chapter 1, it says he put taskmasters on them to make them suffer because of the burden of their work. And they built storehouses for Pharaoh, put them in Ramses. But in verse 13 already, it says that they worked him with backbreaking work and they made their lives bitter. All the work in the fields, anything that they can make them do to make them backbreaking. In other words, just for the purpose of making them suffer. So things start out in a fashion but don't forget, their original intent was only to cause harm. But it was covered in a way that gave the impression that this is something good. If you think about it in a certain way, this was a tactic, wasn't it? Because in the beginning, the people might have objected. Maybe it would have. It's always easier once you have people already who are subservient, right? So they started out encouraging them. You're going to build these great cities and everything. You're enslaved, but you're accomplishing this wonderful job. Look what we're doing here. Look at these projects. Show them the blueprints. Look what we're building here. And you know how good people are. Good people. They see what they're doing is something so productive and helpful. So then they're more willing to go along. Now, once they were already slaves and they already had the whole system of slavery, then the mask went off and they just oppressed them. They just had them going and doing work that was meaningless. It's also that they did this after, despite this hard work, the numbers continued to grow. So then they tried to beat them down more psychologically in a way that they hoped that this would break the family, this would break their ability to reproduce, etc. So again, what happens is that their original plan was to hurt others, to hurt the children of Israel, and they just went from level to level down. In levels of sadism and destruction towards their neighbors. because of their fear and hatred that they were developing for them, because of, again, based on, which was justified by them looking at them as a threat, as an enemy, without any basis. And then at the same time, we see just the opposite, that among the Jews, we see a spirit of self-sacrifice for the sake of the nation. Immediately, and we see people willing to do things that really, they seem impossible. I mean, the truth is, this whole story is a story, I would say the first chapter here, or our first reading on this first Sabbath, the first chapter, Exodus, here, the first few chapters, I would say there are two things. First of all, they are people who do the impossible, and also, at the same time, it's a very realistic story. And I'll tell you why I say those two things. So first of all, like one example is the two midwives, Shifra and Pua, and our sages say this was Yocheved and Miriam, that they defy Pharaoh, which is incredible. I mean, they could have been killed. In fact, I don't really understand how they got out of it. I don't understand why he didn't execute them. My only question is, why didn't he kill them? King told them to do something, they didn't listen. And they just got away with it. Incredible. But that's, like, again, that's like the impossible. And they say this story, we come to them and they're already born already, nothing we can do. Right, like evidently they said, they presented it as if this wasn't defiance, this was, we tried, we couldn't. And again, we see how wicked people work, because first he's trying to do this secretly. Just similar like the work. You start out in a way that seems very, what's the word? But seems very innocent, so to speak. Seems with goodwill, right? He has these midwives go and maybe these were government paid midwives. First he's appearing like he's such a good guy. He's sending midwives really with the intention of having them kill the children, but maybe he sent these. Anyway, he speaks to the midwives to try to do this quietly, and doesn't work. They don't listen. And they say that by the time we get to the women, they give birth already. It's too late. They know how to give birth without midwife help. By the time we get there, it's too late already. And God blesses them because of this. And it says that he blessed them, he built them houses. So there's different, I saw a very interesting interpretation here. I think what did I say? Ibn Ezra? No, in the Rashbam, in one of the early medieval commentaries, I think it was Rashi's son, the Rashbam, Rabbi Shmuel. Anyway, he says that they built houses for the midwives, means to say they were kind of incarcerated. That Pharaoh built them houses to keep them away from assisting Israelite women from giving birth. Very unusual interpretation, but it makes sense in the plain reading of the verse. But our sages say a different explanation. This is what Rashi brings. That the meaning of it is that the midwives feared God, and he made for them houses, meaning God did. Meaning God built them houses. What kind of houses? It says that he built them houses of the priesthood. Means that he built them the lineage that their children would end up being the houses of the priesthood and the houses of the king of Israel. So I was thinking about this, and what's the connection between the reward and the act? But of course, it's so simple, right? What's the connection? What's the job of a priest? He's a representative of the people to beg for. He goes to go on Yom Kippur, and he has to pray on the people's behalf. That's his job. He has to bless the people. He has to love the people. In other words, he has to be selfless, and he has to be a representative of the people in front of God, right? He has to be their mediator. And he has to do everything in his power to try to get atonement for the people and to try to get So I get blessings that the God should bless the people, and right? Pray for them, brings offerings on their behalf. And similarly, the king. What is the king's job? His job is to lead, to be like a shepherd for the people, to take care of them and to lead them in the right direction, both in terms of following Torah, protect them from harm, to go out in battle, to risk his life, to risk his life of his army on their behalf. So that's why they got this blessing, because this is who they are, right? Shifra and Pua, Miriam and Yocheved and Miriam, they're giving their lives in order to promote and increase the number of Jewish children. And it says here also that before it said when they refused to listen, not only they refused to listen, but they helped to strengthen. In other words, if you look at chapter 1, verse 17, it says that these midwives feared God. They didn't do as the king of Egypt said, and they let the children live. But the word is they gave life to the little children. In other words, they assisted in helping them survive. They didn't just not kill them, but they actually helped. So in other words, they were dedicated to helping Jewish children survive, again, for the good of the nation, right? Not they put their own futures aside. They were risking their lives here. So we understand why, as a reward, for this type of a family, for the children who are going to have mothers like this, they're the ones who deserve to be the priests. They're the ones who deserve to be the kings of Israel, people who will be selfless, people who will think of the nation before themselves. They're the ones who should lead. They're the ones who should be the priests. Right? It makes sense. But, and again, the story of Moses is just the story of the impossible. Like, so at this worst moment, when there's this horrendous decree, and infants or newborns are being thrown into the, I mean, just think about the scene of it. It's horrible. Horrible. And this is a place that people were drinking from. They're throwing infants to die there, eaten by crocodiles and snakes and birds and everything. The drowning little infants by the thousands? I mean, it's just, I mean, it's nightmarish, absolutely nightmare. If you want to, I have to say one thing. I mean, it's in a certain way worse than the Nazis, because the Nazis did horrendous crimes, but in a certain way they were hiding the crimes. They burnt all the bodies, they buried the bodies. Here, can you imagine during this period in Egypt? You just, you're walking by the Nile and there's like baby corpses in the water floating. I mean, it's disgusting. What kind of this is the visual and the callousness of the people also. I mean, we can understand a little bit pagan culture. They didn't have a sense of the sanctity of life. I think I've heard this and discussed this idea that we often people forget that this idea of the sanctity of the life of a child is a Jewish idea. That the pagan cultures really didn't have this. They'd often murder infants. The Spartans and Greeks, they murdered infants that were weak. They just tossed them. So that was the thing. They just tossed babies into the water. If there was astrologers who said that maybe there would be a baby who would be a political threat, they just tossed them. Yes. It's unthinkable today. Although you talk about abortion, I don't like to get into current events and such things and draw analogies, but this is like the case that I think was in the news about post-birth abortion. Isn't that what this is? That's what he asked the midwives to do. After the child is born, kill it. Smother it. After it's born, somehow do something, kill it. That's what he was asking them to do. They refused to do it. So at this moment, during this decree, so Amram goes back with Yocheved, and guess what happens? She conceives, and she does have a boy, and he's just this wonderful child. She has a boy, and she sees that he's good, whatever that means. It's unclear. I mean, our sages say that just like the idea of good starts with the idea of light, as we saw in Genesis, that when he was born, the whole house was filled with light. But anyway, but just the whole idea of this incredible optimism and against all odds, because really a normal person would say, this is insane. We're going to try to have a baby under these circumstances. Our baby's going to end up eaten by a crocodile. Who wants to have a child? And particularly, I could say about Yocheved herself. I think it's a lot harder on the woman. You conceive a child, you carry a child, you give birth to a child and all the pain, and then what? Someone comes in, takes that child and throws it in the river? And you know this? And you consent to have a child and take a risk that maybe somehow you can hide it from not from a police, from the whole society. The whole Egyptian society was denouncing coming into people's homes, taking babies. In other words, any sadist in every wicked person in Egypt. I mean, I don't know, maybe it was just everybody. Again, it's hard to relate to such a different moral world, their values. Maybe just everybody was doing it. I don't know. But obviously, we know for sure, just to compare it to our day and age, it gave a license to any sadist, right? Any sicko, any person who dreamt about how they could, be cruel to another person. They had license to do it, to do something horrible, right? But she has a child anyway. And what do? She hides it for 3 months because she's an early birth and they haven't come to check out on her yet. And she puts the little baby in a little, how would I call it? Into like a little, I forget the English word for it, but it's like a little crib, like a little crib raft, that she puts in the water. It's covered with clay and what's it called again? Anyway, it's sealed up on the inside and the out. And she puts it in the water. Also just completely, what are the chances that this child is in? But they just didn't, who knows? Let's see what happens. What else? No other choice. But it's just think about it from a perspective, a human perspective, how insane this is. Meaning to say how the risk of this is and how much faith and hope they have to have, because the chance of success is so small that this child will live. But it gave him some chance, at least it bought some time, right? She didn't want them to find it in the house. So set him adrift in the water and see what happens. I don't know how that solves the problem, because now the parents aren't watching it. Anybody can go grab it in the water. I guess you could say the advantage is that people might not openly know it's a Jewish child. Some child is on the water, maybe it was an illegitimate Egyptian child, who knows? Right? Maybe it was somebody had a baby they shouldn't have, and I'm just trying to understand what was the advantage of putting the child without parental protection, oversight in the water? There's so many reasons not to do this. The Nile is a dangerous place. It's full of alligators, or is it was Nile crocodiles? I think they're called, right? At least I can imagine in those days. And there's just all kinds of people, fishermen. There's just different people doing all different things along the water there. But certainly there was a lot of there was a lot of animals there, and and who's going to feed this baby? They had no answers. The simple interpretation doesn't say that anyone here had any divine foresight or anything, unless you say the light, they felt this baby had special godly protection. Could be. But the point is, let's just give it a shot. Buy some time. Let's see what happens. We'll do anything that It's in God's hands. Let's just do what little we can. That's really the idea. Let's do what we can do. It may be very little. It may not make any sense that this could really help anything. But let's just do the little we can do. And then it's in God's hands after that. That's really what it is, isn't it? I mean, because, the chance of success is like, I don't know, 1,000,000 to 1 here. It's so unlikely that anything could have happened that would have, that this child would have been saved. And that the child is saved. Child is saved. And that's another fascinating thing. And this part is where we get to something that we see true, that is true to life. I heard a rabbi said recently, like, how do we know that the Torah is true? And he says, because if it was written by man, if it was written by the Jews themselves, they wouldn't tell the stories like they're told, because there's too many negative stories about Jews in this book. It's people who write their own stories don't write this type of thing. And here's an example where you have the daughter of Pharaoh portrayed in a very positive light as the person with compassion. She's going down to the Nile, even though her father is doing all these terrible things. When she goes to bathe in the Nile, you also have to ask yourself, why is she doing that? There's no Nile water, in the palace. She has to come here. I don't really know the answer to the question. It could be that it was part of their religion. We see that Pharaoh also went down to the Nile to relieve himself for whatever reason. So I'm not sure exactly why she's bathing here as opposed to closer to her house or asking her maidservants to bring water. But anyway, she's doing it. Again, part of divine providence. It's like just where Moses, the infant, is in his little raft crib, she comes to the exact same place and she sees the baby and she has compassion on this baby and she takes the baby. And Miriam is still watching to see what happened. It's just also amazing. Think about the difference between Miriam and Hagar, right? Hagar, when Ishmael was terribly sick, she can't look, right? She can't look at the child. She's crying. Here, Miriam is waiting to see what happened. Well, what was the most likely thing that was going to happen? He was going to die. That was the most likely thing. But she was watching to see what would happen next. It's almost like they had a premonition that this child is going to live. That they just felt it. But anyway, and then she directs her to, gets the mother back involved. So just this incredible story. He's saved, and yet he still has to do with his mother. It's just like, you can't even write this type of thing. It's just so, uncanny. No one would think of something like this. And yet at the same time, it's telling us this truth that sometimes, the people that you're saying are the worst, among them can be some of the best. There are exceptions to the rule. The Torah is telling us this right away. One of their own, the daughter of Pharaoh herself, saves this child, has compassion, saves the child, and to some extent might be putting herself in some type of jeopardy. It also, obviously, it appears that she didn't have children, but she knew was a child of one of the Hebrews, and she takes the child. And the mother, weans the child, and then she's brought to the door of Pharaoh. Okay. And he's called Moshe because I drew him out of the water. I'm just wondering about what that might have meant for Egyptians, that the child was taken from the Nile. Again, they worshiped the Nile, so maybe this was seen as something, a good sign. I don't know. But what's nice is she named the child after the good deed that she did, and she wasn't ashamed. She didn't try to cover it up. His name was based on what she did. I pulled him out of the water. That was his name. So, and then we have the story of Moses himself. Moses also, it's so interesting because later we find Moses to be the one who is, goes up on Mount Sinai and has communion with God 40 days and 40 nights. So you'd think he would be like this person who's just spiritual, kind of just completely disconnected from this world and, big brain and praying and everything. But we're not told anything about that. We're told that he's a heroic person, someone who, again, like his family, risks his own future to save his brethren or to stand up for an injustice. So Rashi explains over here because it says in verse chapter 2, verse 10, it says that the child grew up and he was brought to Pharaoh's daughter. And then in verse 11, again it says, and it was in those days, and Moses grew up. So why the repetition? So Rashi brings that the first time was physically, physiological. The second time, politically. The second time, he grew in stature in Pharaoh's house, and he was appointed over Pharaoh's house as head of staff, or whatever you want to call it. He was administrator of Pharaoh's household. And at that time, he goes out to see what's doing with his brethren who are slaves. And Rashi points out he saw what was happening with them. He saw their bondage and their suffering. And it means that he paid attention. I mean, I don't think it was the first time he saw it because it was all over the place. But he really was paying attention to it. He matured and, he was empathizing and feeling their pain. He was really observing and paying attention. And that's when he comes across this Egyptian who was beating an Israelite slave, and he kills him. However he does it. But the point is over here is that he's putting everything at risk. It's something the Rabbi points out. He's at a point where he's going up in his career, so to speak, right? He's appointed over Pharaoh's household. What could be better than that? And what does he do? He risks everything. He goes out and he's interested in what's doing with the Israelites, and he sees an injustice. One of them might be murdered. He's being beaten really harshly, and he kills the Egyptian who's doing it. Second day he goes out again, and he's still trying to go out to help, and he's trying to, I guess you could say at this point, right now, he's kind of on a high. He's like, he's going, the first time he did this act, and he saved someone's life. Now he's going out again to be a leader to try to do good for Israelite society, right? And he sees two Hebrews arguing, and that doesn't go very well. The second attempt to do something to help the people is a failure. At least that's not in terms of what he does, but in terms of the effects, right? He tries to break up a fight, and they give him a lot of mouth. They tell him, "Who are you? Who do you think you are? Are you going to kill? What is it? You're a young kid. You got no business telling us what to do, and you're going to kill us like you killed the Egyptian." Then he became afraid. He said, "Oh, now I know." And Pharaoh heard about it, and Rashi tells us, how did Pharaoh hear? Because they denounced him. These Israelites denounced him, even though yesterday they saw that they saved one Hebrew from the Egyptian. They denounced him to Pharaoh. What kind of people is this? That's exactly what Moses wanted to know also. Think about the effects of this on him. Yesterday he gave everything. He put everything at risk. And he actually did lose everything. I mean, think about this moment after this event happens and he's denounced. So he saved one Hebrew, but the result of his actions were he lost His whole future is gone. The people he cared about don't want his help. They hate him. So it seems to him, right? His experience with them is very negative. So where does he go from here? Can you imagine like the collapse that a person could feel? I've lost everything, and like the feeling of being lost. Like, where do I go from here? I just gave everything for you, and you spit in my face. You don't want my help. What did I do? Why did I do it? Where am I going to go from here? What's the point of my life? And we do see that response in a certain sense is that Moses flees and he leaves the whole situation. He goes to Midian and he leaves the whole thing behind, and I guess you could say he doesn't know what to do. But Rashi brings the idea that he really began to understand that the problem of the Israelites was not just from the outside, but the problem was from within. There was something very wrong, like with the slandering and denouncing each other. That someone could do such a thing, that could denounce one of their own or someone that assisted their own. He said that the fact that you could have, what is it called, informants. This now I understand that they're worthy of what they got, because that's a very low type of behavior. So again, this is like not a story that the Jewish establishment. We wouldn't write this story. This isn't a story that we write. Would we write such a story? Oh yeah, the daughter of Pharaoh, she's the kind one, and the Jews, they're the ones who are disrespectful, ungrateful, telling him to, and not only that, denouncing him. Here he's trying to help them, and really does help them. And instead of clapping and saying, "Yay, thank you," instead they reject him and denounce him. Stay out of our business. So it's not a story that we write, but it's a true story, meaning that even though we see so much wonderful gifts and traits of the Jewish people, but there's some bad apples, and the Torah doesn't hide that fact. The question is, did Moses overreact? Is this an overreaction to think that everyone is this way? We don't really get an explanation about his comment. That okay, there's some like that. Is this everyone? Why does he feel that everyone is, that too many, at least there's too many people that had this trait? What made him? Maybe it's just they're two dysfunctional people you happen to come in contact with. I mean, how do we know it's everybody? There are bad apples. Unfortunately, you came in contact with two bad apples. But while we're on the point here, something very interesting that I was thinking about, and that is, in the story here, we learn this wonderful lesson. That's a very Jewish lesson, that it says that, he went out, he saw two Hebrews arguing, fighting, and it says that he says that he said to the wicked one, "Why will you hit your friend?" In other words, that he lifted his hand. He didn't hit him yet. But once you raise your hand to hit your friend, you're already called wicked. So I noticed something interesting in the story of the binding of Isaac that I really didn't notice before. I was reading it in the beginning of the prayers because there's a custom to say it every day. I don't say it every day, but sometimes I do say it. And I was noticing something fascinating there, that it goes through the step-by-step how Abraham prepared Isaac on the altar. He put down the kindling wood, the firewood, and then he bound Isaac and he put him on top of the altar. And then it says that he reached out his hand to grab the knife. And then it says the angel called out to him. It never says, you always think he's raising his hand with the knife, and the angel says, "No, stop." But that's not what happened. As far as from what I read, it says he reached out to get the knife. And the angel called out. That means before he raised it up to kill him, to slaughter Isaac, he was already told, nope, stop right there. So in other words, he never raised up the knife over. Even that would have been, you see that just raising your hand, that's a terrible thing. So God stopped him before he would come to that place that he would raise the knife over his son. He never had an opportunity to do that. So I found that interesting. Similar to the story here, where we see that just raising a fist to someone and before harming them is considered a wicked thing. So it's really amazing that despite this disappointment, terrible disappointment that Moses faces when he flees, the first thing he does is gets involved again. The first thing he does is he sees, a group of women shepherdesses that are being bullied, and he saves them. They're being pushed away from the water troughs or from the well. He gets rid of the bullies, the other shepherds, and he helps them and he gets them the water. Right? So despite everything, he doesn't get bitter. He doesn't change in terms of who he is. He's still the same. Maybe he's a little confused about what he should do now, or maybe he's running away just to save his life right now. It's unclear. But I guess you could say that I think what Moses, realizes, after the story that happens with Datan and Abiram, with the two Jews who behave in a wicked fashion, is that I can't do this. I see I'm not going to lead them out by natural means. I'm not going to become their leader and rise up and revolt. That's not going to happen. This is something that needs divine intervention. It's not going to happen on its own. They're not going to. They have a slave mentality. That's really what he saw. He saw that here he's coming and helping them, and they're denouncing him because they're so. What do they call that when you have a? I forgot what it's called, but when somebody's kidnapped and they start to sympathize with their captor. It's a syndrome, right? So I forgot, Stockholm syndrome. Is that what it's called? They have like a kind of Stockholm syndrome here, where they're siding with their oppressor to their own disadvantage. They're so accustomed, like they're almost like they're telling him, "Don't rock the boat. Stop trying to change things. Leave it as it is." Isn't that what they're really telling him? Like, what are you getting involved over here and trying to make changes and just don't stop getting involved. In fact, we think you're a problem. You're the one who's actually causing us harm. And it is actually a very much a people who are. And I think the Jewish people over their history have had people who have this type of feeling that they say, no, don't do that. Don't do that. You can get the Gentiles angry at us. Don't be quiet. Don't do anything. That's, don't revolt. Don't say anything. Just, keep your head down. Keep quiet. You're putting us in danger by speaking up on our behalf. That's really what they're saying here. They're saying that you're a bigger threat to us by trying to help us. Just leave it alone. Leave it alone. We're safer as is. Don't try to save us. Saving us is a bigger danger. And because of that, we're going to denounce you, because we think what you're doing is more dangerous to us than being oppressed and slaves the rest of our lives, and our children being killed. All of that is okay with us. We're more afraid that if you start getting involved, they're going to punish us more. So just leave it alone. Don't do anything. Leave it. I really, it seems, I mean, I think that's illogical. I can't say, I didn't see any commentaries on it that said this, but it's very likely that this action of theirs that they denounced him shows that they considered him a bigger threat than the Egyptian who was beating somebody, because they believed that, as we see later on, when the Jewish officers tell Moses and Aaron, they say to them, because of you, our situation's gone worse. And that's the fear. It's always the fear of the oppressed person, that if you stick up for them and you try to shake things up and protest, their situation is going to get worse. Just be quiet, follow, appease, so that things don't get any worse. And obviously, Moses understood that if that's the case, there's nothing I can do. They don't want to be helped. They're too afraid. They're too broken. They're too beaten down. And there's nothing I can't help them. They need help from above. I can't do it. I'm not going to, there isn't enough spirit in them to get them, to awaken their spirit of freedom to fight for themselves to get out. I mean, I have to say this, I'm saying this on my own. It's just something that's come to me that's very strong possibility. This could be wrong. This might not be true. I don't know. But it's just something that came to me that fits in very well here. So, but Moses' opinion about how to live hasn't changed. He hasn't become cynical about life because of this event. And as soon as he goes somewhere else, he's also getting involved. Moses is like, the biggest busybody. He's getting involved in other people's business. And nowadays it's like, why don't you mind your own? Why are you getting involved? I mean, he's no New Yorker. I'll say that. He's not. He doesn't go on like he sees people being bullied, and he stands up against the whole group all by himself. To save women, he doesn't know who they are. He doesn't know how they're going to react. He knows nothing. But he sees something that to him looks like oppression, and he helps them. But that's really the thing. It seems like the Torah is telling us that the most important quality of a Jewish leader is his selflessness for the people. Before holiness, before devotion to God, the first question is, are you devoted? Are you selfless? Do you love the Jewish people, right? A leader needs to care about his people. And so Moses is picked as a leader because of his selflessness. I mean, I think that's clearly what the scripture is telling us. Because doesn't tell us about his great spiritual attainments. It tells us that he cares. He not just cares, but he puts his own life aside and what he's trying to accomplish and puts them first, And this is the person we first get to know, who later becomes the person who will pray for his people even when they stray, even when they make the golden calf, and he's ready to give up his future with God. Erase me from your book if you destroy this people. I mean, he's a person who's selfless, who just cares about his flock, and wow. I mean, that you can understand with a leader like that how you can get out of Egypt. How often does the people have such a leader like that? It's very hard. We pray every day to restore our judges like the years gone by. Like in the beginning, like in the early times. And our counselors, like in the beginning, who are we talking about? I assume it's talking about Moses and Aaron and such. Who are the first ones from the beginning, the early days? Where can we find such leaders? Where can we find such leadership? This is really true leadership. And I guess you're saying, if you have leaders like that, you can go out of Egypt. You can get out of the worst situations. If you have a leader like that, God will help. To have such a leader like that is, it's tremendous merit that we don't. I say no more, but look around at our leadership, and you see that we are, that we are destitute. We have a famine of good leadership, generally speaking. I'm not pointing a finger at anyone in particular, but just in general, this idea of devotion. And there are people who, for example, to the United States, who dedicate their lives to helping in some way or to the country, different things. But at the same time, there's good pay, there's certain fame, there's certain influence, there's a lot of personal things also involved. But here we see by Moses, he was ready to give up everything, to put all that on the line. And that is, I guess you could say that's true leadership. And sometimes you do find that, even among Gentiles, also people are willing to sacrifice their own lives and their own benefits that they're getting for a cause, for the people, for their nation. And that's a true leader.